My name is Natalie Hayes. I'm 37 years old, and I'm an emergency room nurse who should have known better than to ignore red flags in my own family. But here we are. 2 minutes before my brother's daughter called me the sad aunt who buys love, I was at his kitchen island, thumb hovering over my phone, sending her $300 on Venmo labeled textbooks, even though I knew damn well it was really for hard seltzer and cover charges, the same way I'd paid her parking tickets, emergency car repairs, and one suspiciously timed lab fee the weekend of Coachella. I hit send, shoved my debit card back into my wallet, and told myself, like I always did, "It's fine, Nat. You don't have kids. This is what family is for." Then I walked into the living room where my whole Midwestern clan was packed in for my brother's Saturday cookout. Red Solo cups everywhere. My niece already glassy-eyed and loud, and I barely had time to sit before she climbed onto a chair, clinked a spoon against her cup, and slurred, "Hey, can we all just thank Aunt Nat for being our personal ATM? Like, seriously, she's just the sad aunt who buys love." And the room actually cheered. My uncle hooted. Someone yelled, "Speech!" And even my own mother, his mom, was bent over laughing, wiping her eyes like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. My face went hot, my phone buzzed with the Venmo payment sent notification, and across the room my brother smirked and said, "Relax, Nat. It's a joke. You know you love it." As a cousin raised his beer and toasted, "To the sad aunt," while I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door without saying a word, hearing someone behind me scoff, "God, she's so dramatic." And my brother call after me, "If you walk out, don't come back asking us for family when you're old and alone." But I didn't even turn around. I just closed his front door behind me like I was slamming a vault shut on my own life and walked straight to my car, hands shaking but weirdly clear, because I knew something in me had just snapped for good. I'll tell you exactly what he yelled as I walked down that driveway and what I did a few days later that made them panic. Text me nonstop. But first, I need you with me in this moment. Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. I drove home on autopilot, pulled into my apartment complex, and instead of going upstairs like a normal person after a family cookout, I sat in the parking space with the engine off and opened my banking app, scrolling through line after line of Zelle transfers, Venmos, and automatic payments with my brother's name, his wife's name, and my niece's name stamped all over them. Rent top-ups, overdue utility bills, bail money that I'd pretended was a loan, even though no one ever mentioned it again, community college tuition, cheer camp. That time I paid off their maxed-out Target card so my niece wouldn't have to be embarrassed at school because she didn't have new shoes. All of it right there in black and white while my brother's parting words, "Don't come back asking us for family when you're old and alone," echoed in a place inside me I'd been too busy to look at. I went upstairs, tossed my keys into the bowl by the door, didn't bother turning on the TV, and pulled out the shoebox in my coat closet where I kept every printed email from his emergencies, every handwritten IOU he'd shoved at me across a table, and I started laying them out across my kitchen counter like evidence at a crime scene, years collapsing into one long pattern. Me, the dependable single sister with no kids, working 12-hour night shifts, getting called our angel at Thanksgiving, and then talked about like I was pathetic behind my back. My phone lit up with the Family Squad group chat, memes from the cookout, boomerang videos of Kayla on that chair, texts from Mom saying, "Everyone's asking why you overreacted," and from my brother, "You good? Don't be weird, Nat. You know we appreciate you." And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to reassure anyone. I muted the conversation for a year, opened my messages with him, and hovered over the call button. then instead opened notes and started typing out a list titled, "Money I Have Given Them," adding rough numbers next to each memory until the total at the bottom made my stomach flip. $74,300, roughly the price of the small craftsman house I'd been telling myself I couldn't afford. Something cold and clean slid into place in my chest, and I heard my own voice in my head. Steady, almost clinical, like I was assessing a trauma patient. I used to think money was the only way they'd love me. Turns out I was just buying a ticket into a family I don't actually belong to. The next morning on my break at the hospital, I called HR and maxed out my 401k contribution. Then I booked an appointment with a financial planner, a woman named Denise, who looked at my pay stubs and my spreadsheet of gifts and said flatly, "If you stop bleeding money to them right now, you could be debt-free in a year and own a condo in 3. And something about hearing it like a medical prognosis made it real. I went home that night, poured myself a glass of grocery store red, logged into my accounts, and one by one canceled every auto payment tied to their lives, their electric bill, their internet, my niece's monthly car insurance, even the overdraft protection that quietly covered their bounced rent checks. Hit save, deleted their names from my quick pay list, then opened the family squad chat and typed, "Hey, I'm okay. I just need to take a big step back. Starting next month, I won't be able to help out financially anymore. I'll explain more when I'm ready." And hit send before I could soften it with a smiley face or an apology. Within 30 seconds, my brother was calling. Then Mom, then my niece. But I flipped my phone face down on the counter, slid it away like a hot pan, and stood there in my quiet little kitchen with my hands flat on the cool laminate, aware that for the first time in 37 years I wasn't rushing to fix anyone's mess but my own. The silence lasted 3 days, which for my family is basically a Cold War. Then my phone started buzzing again while I was charting in the ER, buzzing so much the other nurse at the station joked, "Dang, Natalie, you're popular today." And when I finally checked on my dinner break, there was a long text from my brother. "Look, I don't know what Denise or whoever told you, but you cutting us off out of nowhere is messed up. Kayla's tuition is due Friday, rent's behind. And if she has to drop out because her Aunt Nat decided to play hardball, that's on you. You really want to be the reason your goddaughter's life goes to hell?" Followed by a separate message. "Just remember, this family talks. I'd hate for people to think you're just a selfish nurse with a fat paycheck who abandoned her own blood." I stared at the screen, my chicken salad untouched, fingers itching to type back paragraphs defending myself like I always did. But instead, I locked my phone, finished eating, and later that night texted my best friend Monica. "Coffee tomorrow? I need to say some things out loud before I chicken out." We met at the Starbucks near the hospital, and as soon as we sat down, she said, "So, how was the Hayes Circus?" And I told her everything, from the Venmo at the kitchen island to the toast, to the sad aunt, to the 74 grand I'd tallied on my counter. She winced so hard people at the next table glanced over and said, "Nat, you realize you've basically been their unpaid second parent, right?" And when I shrugged, she leaned in and said, "You get that this isn't normal? My sister and I split a 20 at Applebee's, and my mom still Venmos us." Making me laugh for the first time in days. As we talked, her Apple Watch lit up, and she flipped her phone over to silence it. But a notification on the lock screen caught my eye before she could. A preview from a group chat I recognized by the name, Girls' Night Crew. And the first line of the text read, from my sister-in-law Jenna, "Ugh, Natalie is doing her martyr thing again, acting like we're leeches when she loves being the one in control. Wait till she sees what happens when we stop inviting her." Followed by a laughing emoji. My stomach twisted. Monica saw where my eyes had gone and froze, then turned the phone fully to me so I could read the whole thing, because that's the kind of friend she is. The rest of the message said, She's pathetic, honestly. All that money and no husband or kids, of course she buys Kayla stuff. What else she got? My ears rang, but weirdly, instead of tears, I felt this icy, almost amused calm wash over me. There it was, in writing, what I'd always suspected. And suddenly, I was done arguing with myself about whether I was overreacting. Monica put her hand over mine and said quietly, "This is who they are when you're not in the room. The only question is, who are you going to be now that you know?" And that sentence lodged in my chest. That night, back home, I opened a new text to my brother, thought about the tuition and the rent and every future emergency I was about to refuse, and typed, "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Brew House on Vine. Don't bring Mom. Don't bring Jenna. Just you." And when his typing bubble popped up and he replied, "Fine, but you'd better come ready to fix this," I actually smiled, because for once he had no idea that I was finally, definitively, done fixing anything for him. The next morning, Brew House was buzzing with students and remote workers, and I got there early on purpose, taking a corner table where I could see the door and stacking my printed spreadsheet in front of me like armor, pages of dates and amounts highlighted in yellow. Ethan walked in 10 minutes late, baseball cap pulled low, looking like a man who hadn't slept, and the second he sat down, he launched in without even ordering coffee. "Okay, Nat. You had your little tantrum. Everybody's freaked out. So, can we just get back to normal? Kayla's already talking about dropping classes because she's a burden now. Congratulations on that, by the way." And he said, "Congratulations," like he was spitting out a bad taste. I didn't answer right away. Just slid the top page of my spreadsheet across the table, the one with the grand total circled in red. He glanced down, scoffed. "What is this? Your little invoice?" Then his eyes snagged on the number, and he went quiet. $74,300, broken out by category: rent, bail, tuition, utilities, credit card payoff, car insurance, with his name and Jenna's next to every line. 10 years, I said, keeping my voice level, the way I do when I'm explaining a procedure to a scared patient. "That's how long I've been subsidizing your life. I make $38 an hour, Ethan. I don't have a secret trust fund. This is overtime shifts, canceled trips, my own retirement. This is the down payment I told myself I couldn't swing because family needed me more. So no, we're not going back to normal, because normal is me bleeding myself dry while you roast me for buying love over hamburgers." He shoved the papers back like they burned, voice rising. "So what? You want a medal? You act like we held a gun to your head, Nat. You did this because you like it, because it makes you feel superior. You get to be Saint Natalie, the generous little nurse who has it all together while the rest of us struggle." And a couple at the next table looked up, but he didn't lower his voice. "You're not a saint. You're a selfish bitch," he snapped. "You wait until Kayla's halfway through the semester and then you pull the rug? What kind of monster plays with a 19-year-old's future like that?" My hands trembled under the table, but I'd spent too many nights holding strangers' hands while they coded to let his tantrum scare me, so I picked up the spreadsheet, tapped it straight, and said, "I am not playing with her future. I've been paying for it. And in the process, I stopped having one of my own. This stops now. I will not pay another bill for you, for Jenna, or for Kayla. I have already canceled every autopay linked to your accounts. I've taken you off my credit card, and I've told my bank not to honor any Zelle requests from numbers I don't recognize. Going forward, if you text me about money, I won't even respond." He laughed then, this ugly, humorless bark that made the barista glance over, and leaned in so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and see the little red veins in his eyes. "You think you can just walk away like that? Fine. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Mom, Uncle Dave, Grandma in Florida, the whole damn family. You're done, Nat. I'll tell them you're hoarding cash while we starve, that you'd rather buy some fancy condo than help your own blood. Let's see how it feels when nobody invites you to Christmas or calls when you're in the hospital. Let's see how you like being alone for real, you cold-hearted freak, he hissed, and for a split second the little girl version of me flinched, the one who used to worship her big brother. But then something inside my chest straightened, and I heard Monica's question again. Who are you going to be now that you know? So I stood up, slid my chair in neatly, and said, Tell them whatever story you need to tell yourself to sleep at night. The math doesn't lie, Ethan, and deep down you know it. I won't be your villain or your savior anymore. I'm just done. Dropped a 5 on the table for the coffee I never ordered and walked out into the bright Ohio morning feeling like I'd just stepped off a battlefield. Shaking, sure, but also weirdly light, as if I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks for a decade and finally set it down where it belonged, right at his feet. If he'd taken the spreadsheet home and quietly reflected, this might have ended differently, but subtlety has never been my family's strong suit. So instead, my phone started lighting up that afternoon with screenshots of the group text he created called Real Family, where he'd added every aunt, cousin, and our mother, and opened with, Since Natalie wants to pretend she's better than us, here's what's really going on, followed by his spin on our coffee meeting, that I'd demanded repayment for every dime, that I'd threatened to let Kayla end up homeless, that I'd bragged about choosing a future house over basic human decency. Within an hour, I was the villain in a soap opera version of my own life, with messages from relatives I hadn't seen in years rolling in. Is this true, Nat? I never pegged you as selfish. And wow, money really changed you. Verdante. And a particularly charming one from my cousin Trey. Hope that condo keeps you warm when we're not speaking to you at Grandma's funeral. A week later came the first tangible fallout. My brother called, not about the drama, but because the electric company had finally cut their power off after months of carrying them, and the pink eviction notice on their apartment door was suddenly very real without my quiet, direct deposit heroics. Jenna lost her part-time receptionist job because she kept showing up late, exhausted from working extra shifts at the diner to catch up. Kayla's financial aid office withdrew her from classes when her balance went unpaid, and she posted a melodramatic black screen on Instagram with, Apparently, I don't deserve college because I don't have a rich aunt anymore, which earned her dozens of sympathy comments and a few thinly veiled subtweets aimed at me. I didn't respond, but I saw everything, because my mother, who still hadn't called me once to ask for my side, forwarded every post with messages like, You really hurt her, you know, as if I wasn't already aware. Eventually, Mom announced there would be a family meeting at her house to clear the air, which in Hayes speak meant an ambush. But I went anyway, partly because some masochistic part of me needed to say this next part to their faces. Her living room smelled like cheap candles and tension when I walked in. My brother already pacing, Jenna perched on the couch with her arms folded, Kayla sunk into a corner chair scrolling her phone. Mom started with, We're worried about the division here, like we were two kids fighting over a toy, but Ethan cut her off, pointing at me. No, we're worried about being abandoned by someone who promised to be there. She pulled the plug, Mom, and now we're drowning. And he looked genuinely appalled that life cost money without my card on file. I never promised to be your retirement plan, I said. She, staying by the doorway. I paid your bills while you complained about me behind my back and taught your daughter it was funny to laugh at me for it. I'm not abandoning you. I'm stepping out of a role I never signed up for. Jenna jumped in, eyes flashing. Oh, please. You loved it, Natalie. You loved playing savior. Now that we actually need you, you're suddenly about boundaries. How convenient. And Kayla finally looked up, mascara smudged, voice wobbling. I dropped my classes because of you. I don't have a car anymore because Dad couldn't pay the insurance. Do you know how humiliating it is to go from campus life to sleeping on your parents' pullout because your aunt decided she was done? The words stung because of course they did. But I forced myself not to step into the old script of, I'll fix it, honey. Instead, I said, You're 19, Kayla. Plenty of people work and go to community college, take buses, figure it out. You're not ruined. You're just inconvenienced for the first time in your life, and that's not my crime to answer for. And Mom gasped like I'd slapped her, whispering, Natalie, that's your goddaughter. As if that title came with a legally binding financial obligation. Ethan slammed his palm on the coffee table so hard a coaster jumped, shouting, You sound like some therapist on TikTok. This is real life. We're your family. You do not get to just opt out when you get bored. And I felt that old, familiar pull to apologize, to soften, to hand him back the control he'd always assumed he had. But instead, I took a deep breath and said, That's exactly what I get to do, Ethan. You call it boredom, I call it survival. I have spent a decade choosing your emergencies over my own future, and if that makes me the villain in this family story, fine. I'd rather be the villain in your version than the victim in mine. Then I looked at each of them in turn. At my mother, who chose to laugh with the crowd instead of stand next to me. At my niece, who weaponized my love for applause. At my brother, vibrating with a rage that felt a lot like fear, and said, I will always care about you as people, but I am done subsidizing your refusal to grow up, financially or emotionally. You can hate me, you can block me, you can call me every name in the book at Thanksgiving, but you will pay your own bills. And before anyone could throw another guilt grenade, I walked out of my mother's house, down the same front steps I'd stood on in high school when I promised myself I'd get out and make something of my life. And this time I kept that promise all the way to my car, where I sat for a moment and thought, not with panic for once, but with a strange, fierce clarity. When your family calls you selfish for not giving them money, do you choose to stay their good girl and bleed yourself dry, or do you finally let them call you the bad guy so you can save yourself? The weeks after that felt like living in two parallel universes. In one, my actual life, I picked up a few extra night shifts, met with Denise again, and watched my credit card balances shrink on her screen. Toured a small but sunlit condo downtown with exposed brick and a view of the river that made my chest ache, with a kind of tentative hope I hadn't felt since nursing school. Started going to a Thursday yoga class with Monica, and even booked a solo long weekend in Asheville just because I could. Patients still came in bleeding and broken. Coworkers still brought donuts on Fridays. And no one in that world knew or cared that my family had unofficially voted me most likely to die alone in a fancy apartment. They just knew me as the nurse who always had extra pens and remembered how they took their coffee. In the other universe, the one that lived in my phone and in the gossip loops of my extended relatives, there was chaos. Screenshots Monica showed me of Facebook posts my mother wrote about the dangers of letting money harden your heart. Vague enough to be deniable, but pointed enough that anyone who knew us understood. GoFundMe links Jenna's friends shared for a hard-working family going through a tough time, with photos of Kayla looking pale on a thrift store couch, her bio painting her as an almost orphan whose only nearby relative recently withdrew all support, and texts from unknown numbers that said things like, I don't know what you did to Ethan, but he's a wreck. Just help them out. What's a few hundred to you? I stuck to my resolve and didn't send a dime, but I'd be lying if I said it was easy. There were nights after a rough shift when I'd come home, unlock my door, and feel the loneliness hit so hard I'd have to stand there and remind myself out loud, You are not wrong for refusing to be used. Like a mantra. One Saturday, Monica showed up at my place with takeout Thai and a bottle of decent wine, kicked off her boots, and said, "Okay, give me the latest episode of Hayes Family Drama." So I told her about the GoFundMe, about my mom's pointed statuses, about Kayla DMing me a 3-word message. "Hope you're happy." That I still hadn't answered. Monica listened, then said, "You know my mom didn't talk to me for 2 years after I stopped paying her rent, right?" And I blinked because I hadn't known. She told me about growing up in a trailer park, about sending half her paycheck home for a decade, about the day she realized she'd die in debt if she didn't cut the cord, and how her mother had called her an ungrateful whore, and told all the cousins she'd abandoned her. "She still tells that version at reunions," Monica said, shrugging. "But you know what? I own my house. My kids will never have to take care of me like that. Somebody in every family has to be the first to break the pattern. It sucks that it's you, but it also kind of makes you the badass in this story." And I laughed, a wet, surprised sound, realizing I'd never once considered myself anything close to a badass. Later that night, around 10, there was a furious pounding on my front door, the kind that makes your body go cold before your brain catches up. And Monica and I froze, exchanging a look. When I checked the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was Ethan, jaw clenched, eyes wild, wearing the same hoodie he'd had on in 3 different GoFundMe photos. I opened the door but left the chain on, saying, "It's late," and he barked, "Take the chain off, Natalie. This isn't a social call." Loud enough that a neighbor's TV muted. I slid it free because part of me was still that little sister who wanted to defuse him before he made a scene. And he shoved the door open, looking past me at Monica like she was an intruder, then back at me with a fury that bordered on desperation. "She cut herself," he said without preamble, voice cracking. "Kayla, she said she didn't see the point anymore, that everyone leaves eventually, just like you did. And now she's in the goddamn ER on a psych hold." And he jabbed a finger at my chest like he wanted to push me through my own wall. "Do you get that? This is on you. You broke her, Natalie. If you had just paid her tuition and kept things normal, she wouldn't be like this. You pushed her over the edge with your stupid boundary bullshit." My breath caught. Not because I believed him. I work in an ER. I know mental health is messy and layered and not caused by one canceled autopay, but because I knew how many people would believe that narrative, how quickly my refusal to fund her life would morph into, "Natalie chose money over her niece's life." Monica stepped between us, saying calmly, "Ethan, you need to back up. This is not an okay thing to lay at her feet." But he snarled, "Who the hell are you?" "Oh, right. The friend who's been filling her head with all this therapy talk while the rest of us suffer." And for a second, I thought he might actually swing. Instead, he sagged, tears standing in his eyes he refused to let fall, and said, "They're at Mercy West. Mom's there. Jenna's a mess. You gonna show your face, or are you gonna keep pretending you're not part of this family?" My throat felt raw, but my voice came out steady when I said, "I am part of this family in the sense that I share your DNA. I am not your financial or emotional punching bag anymore, and I am not responsible for Kayla's choices. I am sorry she's hurting. I truly am. But you will not weaponize her pain to drag me back into a role that is killing me." And the look he gave me then was pure hatred, something I'd never seen directed at me from him before. "You're dead to us," he whispered, almost reverent, like he was pronouncing a curse, then turned and stalked down the hallway, leaving my front door wide open behind him. I closed it gently, locked every bolt, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, heart thudding, the weight of his words settling over the room. And Monica touched my shoulder and said softly, "He's wrong, you know. You're not dead. For the first time, you're actually alive in your own life. But even as I nodded, a part of me knew the next choice I made, whether to go to that hospital or not, would define the rest of this story. Mercy West is the same hospital system I work for, just a different campus across town. So when Monica offered to drive me there an hour later, we sat in her car outside the entrance for a full 5 minutes, engine idling, my employee badge heavy in my pocket like a dare. I could have walked in, flashed it, and been at Kayla's bedside in 10 minutes, easing my brother's narrative and stepping right back into the role of savior. But instead, I told Monica, I'll go in alone, because whatever I was about to do, I needed to own it without an audience. Inside, the fluorescent lights and familiar antiseptic smell hit me with a strange déjà vu, my body half expecting to clock in. But I checked in at the front desk like any visitor and asked for my niece's room. The nurse on duty, a guy I recognized from a training seminar, glanced at my badge clipped to my belt and said, "You family?" And when I nodded, he said, "She's on OBS in 3B, but only one visitor at a time. They're having a rough go." And his eyes flicked down the hall in a way that told me more than his words. I walked toward 3B and stopped just short of the doorway, where the curtain was mostly pulled but not all the way, leaving a sliver of space where voices leaked out. My mother's, high and brittle, saying, "If Natalie hadn't turned her back, we wouldn't be here." Then softer, with the wobble I remembered from my own childhood, "I raised her better than this." And Jenna's exhausted reply, "Can we not make this about her for 5 minutes? Our kid is literally on suicide watch." Followed by a muffled sob that might have been Kayla's or hers. Then Ethan's voice, rawer than I'd ever heard it, saying, "I'm the one who lost my job. I'm the one who took the payday loans. I'm the one who told Kayla Aunt Nat would fix it when things got bad. I set us up for this, Mom. I taught her that we don't have to figure things out because there's always a rescue coming." And the admission stunned me so much, I had to brace a hand against the wall. There was a long silence, then a soft, unfamiliar voice, probably the on-call psychiatrist, saying, "What Kayla needs right now is consistent, appropriate support. Not a financial superhero swooping in and then disappearing. If you want her to get better, this family has to change how it functions. Blaming anyone, including your sister, will just keep you stuck." And in that moment, hearing a stranger in a white coat say out loud what I'd been screaming in my head for years, I realized there was nothing I could add inside that room that wouldn't simply recenter me in a story I was finally stepping out of. My hand hovered on the curtain, inches from pulling it back, from walking in to hold my niece's hand and tell her I loved her, and yes, of course, I'd make it all okay. And then I saw, as clearly as if it were printed on my spreadsheet, the future that would lock me into years more of being the default emergency fund, the emotional sponge, the designated adult in a family of people who refused to grow up because they knew, somewhere, that I'd always cave. So instead of going in, I walked back to the nurse's station, pulled a folded piece of paper and a pen from my bag, old habits die hard, and wrote a letter, choosing each word like I was threading a suture. "Kayla, I'm here at the hospital, but I'm not coming into your room because you deserve a chance to heal without me automatically fixing everything. I love you more than you know, not because of what I buy you or what I pay for, but because you're my niece and a whole person on your own. I will not be funding your life anymore. No tuition, no rent, no car payments. Not because you're not worth it, but because you are worth learning that you can stand on your own 2 feet. Your parents and grandma will need to step up in new ways, and so will you. With therapy, with work, with choices that are about your future and not my wallet. If someday you want a relationship with me that isn't based on money, my email is at the bottom of this page. I'm blocking your number and your parents' numbers after this, not out of hate, but to give all of us the space to become different people than the ones who landed here today. I hope you choose to live, really live, for yourself, not to prove a point to anyone. Love, Aunt Natalie. I signed it, added my non-family email address, and handed it to the nurse with a quiet, "Can you give this to Kayla when she's discharged? It's from her aunt." And when he nodded, I walked out of Mercy West without looking back, my badge still clipped to my belt, my legs strangely steady. In the months that followed, the distance I'd put between us filled up with my own life. I closed on the little riverfront condo, painted the bedroom a soft green that made me think of starting over, took a pottery class where I made lopsided bowls that still felt like tiny miracles, went hiking in North Carolina, sat on my own couch on Thanksgiving with takeout turkey and a Netflix queue, instead of refereeing drunk uncles and passive-aggressive side comments. Occasionally, news of my family drifted in through neutral sources, an old neighbor mentioning at the grocery store that Ethan and Jenna had moved into a smaller apartment closer to the bus line, a mutual friend saying she'd seen Kayla working the front desk at a community college and looking pretty good, actually. But I kept my boundary. I never unblocked their numbers, never checked the GoFundMe again, never peeked at their Facebook drama. Every so often, I'd open my email and see nothing from Kayla, and part of me would ache, but another part would quietly root for her to be too busy building her own life to need me at all. One night, a year to the week after the cookout where I'd been christened the sad aunt who buys love, I stood on my tiny balcony with a glass of decent Pinot, watching the lights from the riverfront reflect on the water, and realized no one had panic texted me in months. No one had called me selfish lately, except in my own head on bad days, and for the first time in my adult life, every dollar in my bank account was either paying for something I chose or sitting in savings with my name on it. I thought about that girl at the kitchen island, thumbing out yet another Venmo payment in exchange for a seat at a table where people laughed at her, and I felt a rush of fierce, almost protective love for the woman I'd become instead, the one willing to be cast as the villain in her family's story if that's what it took to finally be the main character in her own. If you were in my place, if the people who share your last name only seemed to love you when you were paying for the privilege, would you swallow your anger and forgive for the sake of family harmony? Or would you cut them off, block the numbers, and choose, maybe for the first time, to live a life that belongs entirely to you?